Hi, welcome to the Arts Club at Home. Today we're very happy to have the poet Rebecca Hazelton available for an interview. Rebecca is an award-winning poet, writer, critic, and editor. That's not a trifecta, it's like a quadfecta, I guess. Her first book, Fair Copy, won the Wheeler Prize from Ohio State University Press. Her second book, Vow, was an editor's pick from Cleveland State University Press. Her most recent book, Gloss, was published by the University of Wisconsin Press and was a New York Times New and Notable Pick. And then most recently, it won the Midlands Prize from the Society of Midland Authors. Her poems have been published also in numerous literary journals and national magazines such as Poetry, The Nation, and Boston Review. She nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and she actually was one of the people who got into the Pushcart Prize anthology and into Best American Poetry. Please welcome Rebecca Hazelton. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone watching. I'm so excited that we get to have this conversation together. Even if we can't be in person, it's really lovely to make the connection.
And we are so happy you're here. So now we'll get to the question part. As I looked at reviews of your work, I thought it was very interesting how different people were in their interpretations of that work. Sort of like the story of the blind man and the elephant. So the LA Review wrote that Loss is an artful revision of the gendered model of reading. And the New York Times said the poems cast a teasing light over the sheen of social norms. So I was wondering, what would you say about what you're writing and what you're doing in the book Gloss?
Oh, that's such a tricky question because it's a lot easier to let those reviews do the heavy lifting for me. I think what both of those excerpts point out is that I am very interested in gender, and I'm very interested in gender roles, and that's how we make up those societal norms. So the kinds of expectations that people have on us when we get married, for instance, when our role as, for instance, if you're in a heterosexual marriage and you're a woman, then suddenly you're a wife. And that is this new thing that somehow is different than being a girlfriend or a girl on the side. So these, I don't know, I think of them as baggage or hangovers from the past, kind of come and land on us when we change these roles, and we have to wrestle with them even when you've got two people who want to be in an egalitarian marriage who say to themselves, oh, we are beyond these expectations. They come in all these tiny subtle ways that you don't expect. So I think that has always interested me, and that's something I'm interested in exploring in my poems. And in particular, when it comes to gender roles, I think a lot about the ways in which we perform gender, the ways in which we signal to the world outside, if one is a woman, what kind of woman one is. And that in a lot of ways is often us trying to communicate how we want to be treated. Because if we're viewed one way, we might be treated one way. And I think women learn early on that society sometimes is not receptive. Society has ideas about how we move through the world. And there's a lot of ways in which women perform their gender in a protective way. And so that's something I also look at in my poems.
That makes me want to ask like 10 follow-up questions, but instead I'll ask you the one that I actually planned on, which is another reaction to your work that I received from a poet I was discussing it with. And she said that you are a double lens poet. And it made me think of the comment about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which is if he wrote about a fawn getting on a bus, it wasn't a metaphor. It meant he saw a fawn getting on a bus. So are you using those double perspectives as a technique that you think about bringing to your work, or are you constantly arguing with yourself and seeing the world from two different ways that you can't quite reconcile?
Oh, I like this question because I don't know if I have a perfect answer for it, which means it's a good question. When I hear that question, I start immediately thinking about my own tendency to have binary thinking. Before we started our official recording, we were talking a little bit about what it's like to be a teenager or in your early 20s. And I was saying that for myself, I was a very black and white thinker. I thought there was one way to do things that was right and wrong, that I think I thought that there were absolutes in the world. And even though as I grow older, that has been eroded more and more, and I find myself looking at a world of gray, I still have this tendency to want to find those absolutes, even though I don't think they're really there. And so I think you see that play out a lot in my work. I mean, you have these oppositions between male and female, and then I have other poems which start to complicate that. Like I have the poem in this book called When He Is a Woman, where the speaker is engaging in some kind of sexual play acting with her partner and blurring the lines of gender and how that gender is presented. In terms of double lens, I liked your Gabriel Garcia Marquez example, because I think it's more like, not that I would see a fawn on the bus and the fawn is really there, but that I would look at the bus and start immediately trying to think, like, what's the bus telling me? What's the bus doing? I feel like I tend to look at everything in a metaphorical way. And I used to think that my primary, if we all have something we're good at in poetry, I used to think it was line breaks for me. And I love my line breaks. I mean, I love them, but I love doing them. But I'm realizing that actually, in addition to line breaks, it's probably metaphor. Everything is a metaphor, and I tend to have really extended metaphors, conceits, where I throw something ridiculous at you and I just take it to a ridiculous conclusion. And that makes me really happy.
That also could sidetrack me for a while, but I'll stick with the plan, which is I'd like to hear a little bit about your process. So in the poem Dominion, when I read it, I came to the line, certainly these sheets are districted and bordered. And I thought, I bet that's why that poem got started. I bet thinking about the two sides of the beds as different or warring countries was where that poem came from. Am I guessing right? Where did that poem come from?
I like your story. So this was written during a time when, this has happened to me twice, where I was kind of writing in like a white hot heat, like in the Sylvia Plath sense, where almost every day I was writing 1 to 2 poems. I don't recommend it because it was happening because I was deeply miserable and I was not doing well, but I was incredibly productive, which probably influenced me not to do anything to fix my life. Yeah. But when I am writing like that, which again has not happened much, I am much more likely to have a poem come out all in a piece. And it only happens during these highly productive, highly miserable writing periods. But this poem pretty much came out all at once. I just wrote it from start to finish. I revise all my work. I don't want to suggest that I just like toss things off. But it did not require a lot of revision for me to get it to a place where I was happy. What I was mostly thinking about, I love that you pointed out districted and bordered. We also later have measured and cordoned. This idea of kind of, how do we take the world and then divide it up into pieces? And I was thinking a lot about the ways in which you can have a relationship and the people in it can constantly be saying, that's mine. Even though you would think that in a romantic relationship, everything would kind of be in the common holding. But instead, it can be a lot of people trying to stake out territory and people trying to not only lay claim to the things and feelings around them, but lay claim to the other person. And I think that that is a desire that a lot of us have, to exercise dominion over other people. And it's what makes for inequity in love, highly. And so that's something I was trying to explore in this as well. The title of it is, of course, Dominion. And for me, that takes me in a biblical direction, that God said to Adam that humans would have dominion over the earth and the creatures. And so we have in this poem, the birds and the fish, these are yours, and that which crawls and that which pulls itself from the water and gasps on the shore, new to the sky's gray curve, yours also. And so we have these animals kind of emerging, and someone, presumably male in this poem, laying claim to them. And so I think a lot about Adam naming the animals, and how if you can name something, then you understand it and you must own it.
That makes sense. That's interesting. No, I think that's a really good description of how the thought process, and it was not the way I would have originally read the poem. So cool.
That's not unusual. I think poems are doing something, and other people open them up for me in interesting ways, and I go, oh yeah, that is what I meant to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a total gear shift question, but in your early work, a lot of it was about sexual relationships. And now that I've talked to you and seen things you post, I know you have a little boy. Has motherhood changed anything about your writing or your approach to your work?
So I think when I first decided that I would pursue motherhood, because I wasn't certain that I would, and then was successful, which isn't always guaranteed, I was very averse to writing about my child at all. Or even, I've never really written about pregnancy. I haven't written much about what I thought about that in relation to my body, even though I write a great deal about the body. And I'm constantly telling my students, you're not brains on sticks. Like, I want you to be in your body and write about the body. Like, I don't want this division between body and mind. But I haven't written much about it. I have started to in places. I very much took to heart one of my mentors in graduate school is a poet named John Matthias, who I admire a great deal. He's known here, but he's not as well known as he is in the UK because he splits half of his time there. But he told us a story about a poem he wrote about his daughter. And although he thought he was writing about an incident that he looked on kind of fondly, that spoke to his love for her, she was very unhappy that he had written about this. And it made me think a lot about what's mine and what's my child's, because that's what he took away from it was, ooh, that was a mistake. I think as writers, we are perhaps encouraged to look at our interactions with the world and people around us as fodder for what we do. But there is a point at which there's harm there and privacy is violated. And we don't have to look far historically to find poets or writers who sort of mined their children, and their children deeply resented it later. And then that work is just out there. I would hate for someone to write about who I was as a teenager. Oh God. So I haven't written a lot about my child, and when I do so, when I write about having a child, it's the me in my poems is not strictly me. The child in my poem is definitely not my child, verbatim, if you will. I think we enter a kind of persona that there's that double lens you refer to, like it's a child, but also we're dealing with something symbolic here. And if I do that, I think it's a way for me to justify writing about motherhood and feel that I am writing about something a little bit more common in experience rather than particular to my child. All of this is to say, I feel very complexly about it, and I have not fully decided how I feel. So I am writing about motherhood, but I think it's from a reserve and it's from a distance because I want to make sure I don't do harm.
Right, and of course there's writing and publishing, which are two different things too.
Yeah.
But cool. I do want to turn over this part of the interview to you so that you can share some of your work, and I will not interrupt while you do what you do.
So I picked 3 poems for y'all. I wanted to find some poems which I thought maybe spoke to the different things I do in this book, because I do write about relationships. I do write a little bit about motherhood, and I also have some poems that I think are kind of funny. So I wanted to give you a little sprinkling of everything. So we'll start with the dramatic relationship poem. No, I'm being a little facetious. All right, Gunpowder. What if I did request that incendiary touch, the slow burn of too much, the bleaching kiss of a man who twisted my mouth into the words he wanted to hear? If it's written, it's written. But what's read differs. What looks alchemical shakes out chemical. Hundreds of years later, rigor is revealed as metaphor. A story about a mixture of grains, ground in alcohol, dried and packed. How I wanted to be more than process, to be the bright impurity wronging the ratio. Did I love him for his acrid smell? For the way he threatened to ignite just by shuffling in, all 3 parts of him uneasy? In friction, we see what rubs and what breaks off. And in the fiction we tell others, there is an explanation for fire and its hungers. I said love, and that is a match. I said believe me, and that was powder. So when I'm speaking to people who are interested in working on their own writing, I always give that poem as an example of the wonders of Wikipedia. Because I think I wanted to know one thing about gunpowder. And I lost about 3 hours reading about gunpowder to write that poem. And I loved it. It was so fantastic. And it ended up informing the language incredibly. Gunpowder, quite complicated. So here's one of those poems where I'm actually talking a little bit about motherhood. Why I don't believe. I knit a baby out of spare cells, and now that baby isn't a baby anymore, but a baby boy, but a boy walking. His male cells star my brain and make him always a part of me. In the morning, he doesn't want me to pick him up, but wants his father. He shies away from my arms. I am in an unequal relationship with a toddler. In the afternoon, my son lies down on a large piece of paper, and I try to trace a crayon. I read on the internet that children like you to draw spooky copies of them. We never get much past the head before he laughs and rolls away. I want him to be still, so I can steal a silhouette of his body right now, this very second, before he's someone else. He gestures for me to trace my hand, and I do. He looks at the green crayon tracing, at my hand, then his own. A copy, I say, and he shakes his head. No. Okay, and this last one is a little on the silly side, so I hope you'll forgive me. My big unsubtle feelings. When you wake in the bathtub, surrounded by ice, your first thought will be that you are a crushed mint leaf in the world's largest julep. And I want to say, I'm sorry. I took your appendix because I feared it would burst. I fished out your spleen to balance your humors. I stapled your stomach because I can't bear to imagine you middle-aged and paunchy. And I spooled your intestines round a crank to whittle your middle, the better to put my hands around. Ha ha, very funny, you might say. Now help me get out. I worried your calves had ideas of leaving, so they are under the bed. And your arms now hold me and never complain or steal the covers. Every morning, I pet your hair on my pillow. I pet your tongue. I cover your eyes every night. I'm a lovely person to be in a relationship with.
Yeah. Like, do I go in the Halloween direction or do I go in the unfriending you direction after I think about that poem?
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you want your Facebook feed to be interesting.
Exactly. Well, that was a lovely reading, or a fascinating reading. And we really appreciate it. Before we go, can you tell people where to get your book? And maybe even hold your book up so they can see it.
This is the book. You can see that they've chosen a very sexy lady smearing her lipstick, which startled me when they first sent me the cover. I was like, oh. And then I realized it's because I'm this weird, like, Victorian lady secretly. So it is available easily. You can find it online using, say, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but you can also go through your local indie bookstore, which might be a nice idea during these times. Yeah, I think it should be readily available to you. You can also order directly from the University of Wisconsin Press website if you wanted to as well, which is lovely. They're a fantastic press, and indie presses and university presses are doing incredible work to keep poetry alive in our country. So anything we can do to support them, I would suggest.
Thank you. So that was Rebecca Hazelton, or is, because she's still bobbing on my screen. And this is the Arts Club at Home. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. And thank you all watching this. I really appreciate it. And I hope one day we can meet in person.